Greece in the 6th century BC. It was aided by one of the most probing minds in history, Pythagoras. Our alphabet, the buildings that surround us, even the music we hear, owes a debt to this brilliant philosopher. In his pursuit of wisdom, Pythagoras traveled broadly, searching for lost occult knowledge. He found it in the mystery schools scattered throughout many different cultures. Pythagoras synthesized the elements of these teachings into a new discipline, philosophy. Its foundation, numbers.
He believed that mathematics and philosophy and an understanding of the divine all went together.
We can't say he originated anything, but he condensed and boiled down the knowledge of the world and then brought it to a practical application.
Pythagoras identified numbers as the most fundamental elements of creation.
As we look at science in this day and age, we're finding that the whole world is filled with these mathematical constants. You've got pi, you've got the speed of light, you've got the force of gravitation. So the idea that numbers describe the world seems to be the case.
In 518 BC, Pythagoras opened a school in the Croton region of southern Italy. His carefully selected disciples were called mathematicoi. Their initiation was rigorous. 3 introductory years, followed by 5 years of absolute silence, then 5 more of training. Only then were students ready to learn the most sacred mysteries of numbers.
He wanted to produce philosophers like himself, so you had to be very circumspect, you had to be very self-controlled to be able to even be in his school.
Pythagoras turned the numbering system of the Babylonians into a sacred science.
They believed that number was like God, and to connect with this was to be talking to God. And so from that arises a whole lot of symbolism that later becomes numerology, Kabbalah, things like that.
Pythagoras discovered that the mystery schools shared the belief that all of creation was at one with God.
He did a huge amount of explaining sacred mathematics by showing how the 1 splits and becomes 2, the 2 finds a synthesis and becomes 3, the 3 breaks open and becomes the 10,000 things. And that same story you read in the I Ching, you read in other metaphysical ancient documents, because everybody was trying to understand, how do we get number out of all?
Many credit Pythagoras and his school with the development of numerology and the efficient Greek alphabet eventually adopted by much of Western culture. Pythagoras also applied numbers to decode music, which Greeks regarded as the language of the gods. He invented the monochord, which defined the numerical ratios of the musical scale. Pythagoras believed he had solved the mysteries of the universe.
But there was also this idea that there was a music of the spheres, that the heavens itself was playing a sort of orchestral piece.
The planets themselves stack up around the sun at harmonic intervals. White light breaks out into color at harmonic intervals. Sound is also harmonically, the harmonic sequence that comes out of any given note, those nodes of overtones are all governed by the same mathematics. So it was Pythagoras who articulated harmonic math to the West.
Ultimately, the exclusivity of Pythagoras' school caused its downfall. In 508 BC, the school was burned to the ground.
There was a point at which his schools were attacked and destroyed and some of his followers killed. Pythagoras himself left and went off into the countryside and died, and no one really knows what happened. Some people think that he committed suicide, but it's a mystery. No one's really sure.
The society was hounded into extinction. Generations of later Greeks built upon Pythagoras' philosophy, and Aristotle turned it into science. But then came Christianity, and for the next 1,000 years, religion cast a long shadow over science and the occult.
His father was Nazarchus, an international merchant from Samos, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea, and his mother was Parthenis, a Greek Apollonian. While traveling abroad near Delphi in Greece, Parthenis requested Nazarchus visit the oracle to Apollo. The oracle informed the couple Parthenis was pregnant with a male child and instructed them to abstain from relations during the pregnancy. Parthenis changed her name to Pythagoras, but no record exists of her surviving the birth of her son, Pythagoras. Pythagoras traveled extensively with his father Mnesarchus during his formative years, and Mnesarchus raised Pythagoras into the Median Persian cult of Zoroaster, the prophet and son of Ahura Mazda, the god of light. It is widely believed that Pythagoras was also initiated into the other religious cults of his day in all the lands he and his father traveled. These included, according to some, the Eleusinian mysteries of the Attica Peninsula, the Egyptian mysteries at Thebes, the Babylonian mysteries in Chaldea, and the cult of Adonis in Syria. Some believe it was from the Babylonian priestcraft, while a prisoner in Chaldea, that Pythagoras studied the theorem that he would later become most famous for inventing, the theorem for all right triangles that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Although the cause and date of his father's death remain unknown, it is recorded that Pythagoras himself traveled as far east as modern Afghanistan, where the Brahmins of Elephanta and Ellora in Hindustan called him Yavanshara, the Ionian teacher. Pythagoras finally settled in Samos, his father's home, where he lived until the age of about 35 under the rule of the tyrant Polycrates. Around the year 550 BCE, Pythagoras went into self-exile from Samos and founded a university of mathematics in Croton, Italy, where he lived and taught for around 20 years. By about age 55, Pythagoras' school had gained significant enough political influence in the Council of 1000 who ruled Croton that when one of their politicians, history records his name as Cylon, although this is only a pseudonym for the younger mathematician Hippasus, refused to communalize his property, his discovery of the square root of 2, to the cult of Pythagoras, and was thus rejected from cult membership, thrown off a boat to be exact, Hippasus appealed to the Council of 1000 to have Pythagoras tried for criminal conspiracy against the state. Pythagoras fled Croton somewhere between 530 and 495 BCE, narrowly escaping a fire set by Hippasus and a mob at Pythagoras' wife Milo's house, with his disciples Archippus and Lasus. He fled from there to Rhegium, Italy, a port town near the island of Sicily, where he parted with Archytas of Tarentum, another disciple, and from there set sail to Metapontum in northeast Italy, the hometown of Hippasus, his would-be assassin, and took refuge in the temple there. He lived on sea cucumbers and honey until he eventually died of starvation.
In a theory known as the harmony of the spheres, Pythagoras proposed that the sun, the moon, and the planets each emit their own unique hum based on their orbital revolution. And as the orbits are gravitational in nature, we could relate this hum to gravitational waves. The Earth's hum as it orbits the sun would therefore correspond to the frequency of the gravitational waves linking the Earth with the sun, which of course is not a controversial idea. However, according to Pythagoras, this hum derives from the orbit itself. In other words, it derives not from the gravitational force between the Earth and the sun, but from the orbital path that the Earth follows. We then find that there is a set of formulas that can solve a Pythagoras hum. But what is unexpected is that this theory doesn't use gravity. Furthermore, these same formulas can be used to solve the atom.
So the concept here is that those grey lines are actual physical gravitational waves. They physically exist. It is these grey lines which are orbiting or rotating around the sun, and they pull or drag the planets along with them. The planets are not moving, there's no gravitational force forcing the planets around. They are being pulled by these grey lines. Now if we pull the apple in each direction, nothing of course happens. The apple won't move. And here of course the apple moves at the same speed as the gravitons. Now here you see from this Pythagoras triangle that the apple is pulled downwards, but it travels slower than the gravitons themselves. Now these gravitons are travelling around in a circle. The apple will appear to accelerate towards the centre, and then when it reaches the centre it will deaccelerate towards the other side and then bounce back and so forth. So if we couldn't see these gravitons, we would imagine that there is some kind of force pulling the apple towards the centre. And we find that when the arrows are pointing in random directions, they are unaligned, we have a state of gravitational potential energy. And when the arrows are all pointing in the same direction, they are aligned, we have a state of gravitational kinetic energy, maximum velocity. If we could put an apple on top of the North Pole and dig a hole through the centre of the Earth to the South Pole, the apple would seem to fall right through this hole. It would have potential energy at the North Pole because all the gravitons are unaligned, and kinetic energy, maximum velocity, at the equator because all the gravitons are now aligned.